Section 1.7, transformations of functions. Again, a lot of review from your Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 coursework, so I'm going to kind of go over some of the very basic ideas and focus in a little later on something that I think is important at this level of our mathematical career, okay? So, we are not going to go nearly as in-depth as you would have in Algebra 2 into transformations of functions. Mostly vertical shifts and horizontal shifts. Those are the main things we're going to be looking at. So a vertical shift of c units upward or c units downward, what you're going to see is that's going to happen after the function rule. So after f of x has been applied to your input, after everything has been done to it, okay, you multiply, you add, you square, whatever. When everything is said and done, you have your y value. All of a sudden, they just tack on something else. They do a plus c. Now what that does is that takes the y value and that increases it. That shifts every point on that graph up so many units. If you subtract c, that means every y value after it's been manipulated by f of x, every y value is then going to shift down c units. So what we see here, is that it is after the function rule. So it's after the function. It's after the square root, after the absolute value, after the cube, after the whatever. So it's after the function. It is outside any parentheses. Okay, those parentheses, those groupings, it's after all of that stuff. Your horizontal shifts, they happen inside the function. So they happen during the function rule. So we see f of x minus c. We see f of x plus c. And what actually happens is these horizontal shifts have an opposite effect. Okay, so when you see it inside the function, there's an opposite effect. If you subtract c inside the parentheses, inside the square root, the subtraction actually shifts it to the right. The addition actually shifts it to the left. Okay? So vertical shifts happen after the function, outside any parentheses. Adding goes up, subtracting goes down like you'd expect it to. Horizontal shifts happen inside the function, inside the parentheses. There's an opposite effect. When you subtract c inside, it actually moves to the right. When you add c inside, you actually move to the left. Right, so identifying those transformations in these functions, that really is a review of what you have seen before. Now this is what I want to focus a little more on. So reflections. A reflection in the x-axis. So in, you can also read that as over the x-axis. Okay, so you have negative f of x. That is before the function. Because whatever the function is, you're just taking the opposite. Flip it over the x-axis. Okay? A reflection over the y-axis, it happens on your x value. So let's say you were plotting x equals positive 2, and you're going to do everything you do to that 2. Well, now you're doing all that to negative 2. So it's over the y-axis. And here's the really important thing I want to zero in on. The order matters, okay? Order of operations. These are quartic functions, okay? So our parent function is x to the 4th. Now describe what was done with that function to get this graph. There's a couple of ways you can go about that. Now you might think to yourself, oh, quartic, an even function, has symmetric end behavior, so it starts down at the origin and both sides go up. Okay? This one is going down. So immediately, reflection over the x-axis. So you might say, okay, g of x is a negative x to the fourth. So it got reflected down, so it was going up and now it's going down. And then it got shifted up. So that vertical shift plus 2. So a reflection, then a vertical shift. Or, let's say you're a vertical shift first kind of person. Okay? Now it could happen that you took that quartic, you shifted it down 2 units, and then you reflected it over the x-axis. So you could have negative x to the fourth minus 2. Either of these would be correct depending on the order. So if someone is describing to you a series of transformations, you better pay attention to what they're saying first, what they're saying second, and so on. Make sure that you're following the story that they're telling, that you're not jumping around from chapter 1 to chapter 4 to chapter 3. Make sure you go in the correct order.